Did you know your machine will roll a hem for you? That's what this foot is for. The best part is, you already probably have it in your big pile of junk that you keep next to your sewing machine. It's called a rolled hem foot, and it has a special curl that creates the hem for you so you don't have to do it. A good hem begins with a straight edge. Then roll the edge of the fabric in about a 1/4 inch or maybe a little less and iron it flat with an iron. You'll do this for about 2 to 3 inches on your fabric. Then roll it back again on itself and hit it with the iron again. Once you've done that, go ahead and pin it in place with the pin pointing towards the edge of the fabric. Then place your fabric up underneath the foot and drop the foot. Go ahead and sew a few stitches on top of the hem that you made with the iron. Once you've done this, leave the needle down in the workpiece and lift the foot. Go ahead and pull the pin out. Now comes the tricky part. We've got to get the edge of the fabric up in this curl. And sometimes it's hard to do, but be persistent. If you do it right, it should look like this. And once you've got it, you just go to town. Any sewing machine can do embroidery. We'll start by removing the foot. Make sure you retighten the screw so it doesn't come off. On some machines, you'll need to re-drop your foot. Set your stitch width to 0, your stitch length to 0, and if your machine has the feed dog adjustment, set it to 0 as well. This allows your machine to free float with a straight stitch. This is great for quilting. Place your work in an embroidery hoop and simply spin the control knob with your hand to sew instead of using the foot pedal. Be super careful not to get your fingers in the way. If your machine has a zigzag option, you can do custom embroidery by setting the stitch width wider for a technique that's called thread painting. It's helpful to print or draw your design and stick it to your fabric with a light dust of spray adhesive. Don't spray the fabric though. Then just fill in the design. You can switch out your bobbins to change colors. And don't be afraid to hop around. You can always cut the strings later. Though I like to stitch a box and then sew over it to lock each segment each time I hop. Here's that box just a little closer. If you're making a patch like I am, make sure your borders are nice and thick. You can always go back and forth. But most importantly, keep your fingers out of the hoop. When you're done, peel the paper back, trim your strings and your outline, and you'll have a nice custom patch that you can put anywhere. Who needs an expensive embroidery machine? Pouncing is an old sign maker's trick that allowed them to transfer their very large drawings to walls. But it's useful for so many more things. You begin with a design and trace it out by poking holes in it with a needle. This can be done by hand on a sewing machine really quickly, and you're not limited to a paper size. Once you've punched the entire drawing, you then rub a powder such as talc or pencil lead over the design to transfer it to your fabric or your wall. You're left with a bunch of dots that then suggest that pattern. And because pouncing creates a bumpy texture on the stencil, cake decorators often press their designs directly into the fondant, leaving them with dots they can then trace with icing. But pouncing isn't just for embroidery or for wall murals. I used pouncing to recreate Jimi Hendrix's guitar. Etsy user Warp Design creates these super cool lampshades, so use your imagination. Item number 4 is called couching or yarn drawing. It's essentially sewing down yarn on top of your fabric. We'll start with a pattern using the pouncing technique that we learned just a minute ago. Set our stitch width to something a little wider than the yarn we're planning to use, and our stitch length needs to be 0. We'll place our yarn on top of the work, leaving a tail that comes out behind the presser foot. Then, we'll sew a few stitches by hand to lock the yarn in place. Don't worry about the tail sticking out behind the foot, we can cut that off later. Then we'll set our stitch length to 4 or all the way up, or whichever you prefer, and start sewing. Keep the yarn straight and follow your pattern. When you want to turn, leave the needle down in the work and lift the foot to spin. Then you can continue sewing. Now, couching isn't just for yarn, although there's really no limit to what you can create with the yarn drawings. I think it'd be really neat to use some of this electroluminescent wire. It's pretty inexpensive and can run off a battery pack. And it's how they created Scarlett Johansson's glowing suits in The Avengers. Last but not least, you don't need a complicated buttonhole system for your sewing machine. You can do without it. We'll start by measuring our button using a hem guide or a ruler. Then whatever our button measures, we'll add about an 1/8 inch. We'll take that measurement and mark it on our fabric with a sharp piece of chalk or soap. Then we'll use the chalk to mark the ends. We'll set our machine up like we're doing embroidery and slowly and carefully trace down the line. Then we'll go over that a couple of times to make our line thick. After we complete our first side, simply leave the needle in the work and spin it 180 degrees and continue back down the line. The second or third pass is always faster. Then we'll sew over the ends, about halfway over the top. Don't worry about hopping, we can always cut the strings later. Now we'll go ahead and trim our strings. To open the buttonhole, we'll put a pin in the far end to protect the thread, and then open the buttonhole with a seam ripper. And that's it! A perfect buttonhole, without a fancy sewing machine or any complicated accessories. Thanks for watching the show. If you'd like to help us out, click subscribe, and you'll get to see all the new videos we put out. Also, if you have any questions or anything you'd like to see us do, put it in the comment section below, and we'll try to make that happen. And I'll see you next time on Create.